This interview is with Cathy Harris. She is a cult recovery specialist. After having been in the Jehovah's Witnesses for 26 years, she is now helping other people deprogram, come to terms with themselves and the world. And she also has a really interesting way of doing that, where she helps people who've been on psychedelic journeys to process in the context of these medicines. I'm really so excited. Cathy, how are you doing today?
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Yes, I'm really excited that you're here.
Mhm.
Um, can you tell us a little bit about your work and specifically what was your entry point into the world of trauma-informed therapy?
Mhm. Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, my entry point was probably my own experiences. Um, as you mentioned, I had been a Jehovah's Witness from the age of 17 to 43. At 39 years old, I went through some really difficult things. Things uh, came together that had been going on for many, many years. And I had time in a hospital after a suicide attempt. Didn't realize that feeling trapped in the religion had anything to do with it at the time. But looking back, I realized it really did. So I had been living in San Diego, I love San Diego, but I landed in Iowa where my brother was and worked in a grocery store for about a year after that, and then started looking into going to school. I did not know at the time you still could get money from the government to go to school, which was, I'd never heard of that. And so went to school, and within a couple of years, I really took the action to leave the religion, knowing that I'd be shunned. Um, and what happened for me was I was in a big state university, beautiful big library full of wonderful books, and the psychology section, which was my field of study, went right into the religion section, things I wasn't supposed to be reading. The Watchtower Society calls anything written by ex-witnesses spiritual pornography, and that makes it really, really bad. So I read this one book called The Orwellian World of Jehovah's Witnesses, written by an ex-couple, and it astounded me because it paralleled all the elements in 1984 to being a member in the religion,
Hmm.
and it just astounded me that I was going through these things, and it plunged me into a crisis because I started saying to myself, I can't keep doing this, meaning going door to door and teaching other people these teachings that I realized I didn't believe anymore, which is shocking. I was the strong one in my family, was the one in my circle of friends, one of them that would encourage people to hang in there through difficulties when there was injustice, especially toward women.
Mm.
So yeah,
So you're a strong healer. You've become a healer. You've become somebody that heals others after experiencing some pretty heavy stuff that you went through.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, do you want to talk about how you got involved initially in that group? What was the emotional or
Yeah,
social need that the group was offering?
sure. Yep. I was in the Midwest in Indianapolis, and my mother had been in the religion, but she was excommunicated, or what they call disfellowship, from the time I was about 2 till I was 17. She and I had very push-pull hate kind of relationship. So she got back into the religion when I was 17 and wanted me to be in it, and I resisted. I had a boyfriend who wanted nothing to do with it. And then she kind of manipulated me into going away for a 5-day convention, and with a bunch of young people from the local congregation. And this one young man flirted with me, and that, kind of started that. And I came home and broke up with my boyfriend, and all of it was very traumatic. And you're 17. So when I was 17, I studied with the witnesses and I got baptized. When you get baptized into something like that, you're making this commitment
Yes.
and you don't think about what the outcome could be if you change your mind or grow out of the need for that or have experiences that lead you not to believe teachings anymore. And
Especially as a
so,
younger person, right? At 17,
right, right.
your brain's ability to sort of plan effectively for the future is not actually fully formed.
No. And there had been no plans for my future at the same time. I
Uh-huh.
was I had my difficulties in school, but I had good grades all through them. It was the 60s, and at one point I was in a very large high school, and it was very easy to skip class, and I skipped like 60 days in one semester or
Uh-huh.
whatever. And um, there was no money saved for me to go to college. My family was working class. There
Uh-huh.
was no encouragement to go to college, except from a school counselor who was appalled when I quit, looking into that with her. And so, your future is determined by something like this. When I was 1970, and I had been a war protester at 15 years old in the Midwest.
Mm.
Um, I was upset about racism and injustice and poverty and war, all those things. And they came to me with these beautiful paradise pictures. Don't you want to live in paradise? Blah, blah, blah.
Mm.
And there was an answer in the box. And
Right.
so I went for it,
So
got love bombed.
what does the group get from the Jehovah's Witnesses? What did they get from their members? Do you think it's mostly a financial thing? Is it a control? Like, how do they benefit
Well, the
from?
leaders do, but the leaders live in beautiful, beautiful quarters in upstate New York.
Uh-huh.
Everything is provided for them, and until they used to print all their own literature. Of course, it's all digital now. And when they had printing facilities, and they owned prime property in Brooklyn, New York, for 100 years, and people would go there and live their whole lives and serve, not really get paid, except for bus money
Uh-huh.
basically. And then when they downsized, basically, all those people were on the street with no social security, no nothing.
Wow. A
And
certain word comes to mind when I hear these kind of stories. Slavery? How's that
well,
legal to
there
to,
there was
have?
there's a very old book called 40 Years a Watchtower Slave, written by a man who left the religion, who spent the rest of his life outside of the Watchtower headquarters in New York, preaching against them basically, which I am not an activist because I don't want to give them any more time.
Uh-huh.
I am fine talking about my story and my work, but I don't yeah, I know how hard it is to lose your faith. It was very, very difficult. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And a lot of more people need to go through that process. But, questioning what you've done with your youth for 20, 17 to 43, that was my youth.
Yeah.
And so, going to college at 40, what in the Midwest, where I didn't really want to be, it was difficult. And a lot of people helped me. In religion like that, there's a lot of it's us versus them. Whoever's not in it is them. And worldly people
Yes.
were, if they were nice to you, they were trying to trick you. And if they're mostly not going to be nice to you. But I found the opposite. A lot of people helped me get housing, get into school, not navigate all it was a big university.
Yes,
I
I've
had,
found in my journey outside of the group that I was in, Homestead Heritage out of Waco, Texas, I've found
mhm,
that the thing that helped me heal the most was finding community, finding people that were willing to help me just because I was
mhm,
human and they could,
right,
you know?
right,
Because
right.
when you're brainwashed to that level of thinking that everybody, the us versus them, is basically everybody out there
That's right,
wants to hurt you
right.
in some
Right.
way.
And
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 it's
being
so
directed by
devastating
this
psychologically.
Satan, right? They're being directed by Satan. And so the thing is, if you leave that religion, especially because you don't believe the teachings anymore, as an apostate, I am worse in their eyes than a murderer or child molester. Because those people might repent and come back, but when you don't believe the teachings anymore, you're not going to do that. So they preach against us quite a bit. and they make it into this us versus them. They have this summer, they have a war on apostates. Well, we're just people out here trying to live our lives, right?
Right.
And so, that whole thing, their preaching, teaching was that if you leave, then if you do well, Satan is blessing you, and you don't want that. And if you don't do well, see, Satan's out there making everything bad. So you're between a rock and a hard place, no matter
Yeah,
what
you can't
happens.
win either way. That's that
No.
absolutist kind of logic that doesn't make any sense.
Right, right. I had
Yeah.
a very interesting phone call this weekend. I won't go into the details of it, but somebody who's an elder and I believe lives at the headquarters in New York called me and wanted to speak about a family situation from 40 years ago
Hmm.
and was actually cordial to me. I believe that the elders can talk to us because they're kind of immune to our evil ways. And it was funny. He didn't preach at me except toward the end of the conversation. He goes, "Let me ask you, where do you think you'll be in a million years?" And they think this is a really substantial question, right? And a relevant, substantial question. I used to do this, so I know how they feel. And I just said, I hope I'm asleep or living another a life. I said, I'm not
Right.
sure what I believe. And he just didn't, and he's the only person, my brother, nobody in my family ever asked me why I left the religion. They
Mm.
just started shunning me like they're supposed to. So this guy asked me, so what happened, Kathy? And I told him some things that he knew about. And I also said I just grew beyond the need for organized religion, and they don't know what to do with that.
Hmm.
They don't really know what to do with that when it's like, and because it was some big things for me, but that's not the only thing it was. I grew beyond the need of those kinds of extreme out there, Armageddon is coming any minute um beliefs. And it had lots to do with living 26 years. When I got into it in 1970, it was like the end is it's tomorrow. Before I moved I found my dad, who was a witness, I had grown up with in 1974, and that's how I came out to San Diego as an adult. And before I left Indiana, it was April 1974. They had us running door to door, not stopping to talk to people because the end is so near. And we were
Right.
just passing out
The immediacy of
these
that.
flyers. Right.
Yeah, the end is
And
is tomorrow. It could be tomorrow. It could be
right,
tonight.
right,
It could be
right. And
next, you know. And
that's
so
50 years ago. That's my lifetime, basically, right?
yeah, and
As
then
an
after
adult.
decades pass and you keep hearing the same thing, it's
Right,
kind of like that logic starts to weigh on you, especially since you're no longer young and your brain is like fully formed and you're able to, really,
right, right,
yeah. So there was
right,
probably a long time that you were in there that, after you had grown from 17 to, I don't know, like 25 to 27, you were fully developed by then, and then you probably had gotten stuck in there because of the way that the group is set up with relationships to control you. But
right.
was there a particular moment that you realized something wasn't quite right?
Um, it was more like a period of weeks that all these things came together. I was in Iowa going to school at a place I really didn't want to live in. I had one friend from the congregation. Um, my son, who's on the spectrum, was having a lot of problems. He didn't have any friends and he wasn't supposed to have worldly friends. So I'd go to the elders and talk to them. Then I'd learn from him that it was their kids that were kind of bullying him.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
you know, so a lot of things came together, and really it came together when I read that book, The Orwellian World. And what
Hmm.
happened was, in my mind, I started saying I can't keep personal integrity and teach this stuff anymore. And it was like, personal integrity, what? Because your integrity is all wrapped up with God's name, right? You have a
Right.
work ethic to bring honor to God's name. You dress a certain way in the community to bring honor to God's name. Everything is around bringing honor to God's name. It has nothing to do with your personal integrity. And when I started hearing that in my own mind, it was like, what? And then it was like for the first time, I really felt in my body a truth that,
Hmm.
and that truth conflicted with the truth. They call, when you're in that religion, they call you talk about being in the truth.
Uh-huh. Yep, that's familiar to me as well.
Mm. Yeah, and well, and as I came out of it when I was in school and I met someone who I ended up being married to for 12 years, who'd been in a much smaller cultish group, and we would talk, and he would say similar things to what I believed, and I would say, I don't know, that can't be right. I'm in the only true religion cult.
Yeah.
How can you have similar, and then of course, as I got to know people and hear teachings and stuff with more extreme, I met somebody who was raised in a kind of an Orthodox Catholic kind of home, and it was very similar to what I experienced in that religion. And so that really opened my mind. I read a book by Robert Heinlein, who's a very famous science fiction writer of the 60s, called Job, A Comedy of Justice.
Oh, that
And
sounds really interesting. I'm
it's
gonna write
it's a
that down.
great book, very entertaining. And at the end of that book, the indication is there are gods upon gods upon gods upon gods. And it was like, oh yeah, I get that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting how how these groups manage to do this. I was talking with a friend who is an ex Mormon recently, and we were just comparing notes, as one does, and it's like, how did they all have the one true way? It's like,
Right.
that's one of
Right.
those qualifiers
Right.
that um kind of makes one of these groups a cult or a high control group.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think it was interesting what you said. I want to ask you about it earlier. You said something about uh, sort of the link between your body, your physicality, and what happens like after spiritual abuse. I forget how you had phrased it, but you said also just now that was the first time you felt in your body kind of the truth. And that's something that I think many people don't really realize
No.
is a thing is that link that you sort of internalize these emotional and psychological abuses into your body. And
Right.
so even after you get out and even after you've done the psychological work, a big part of that is actually doing the body work.
Oh,
And
absolutely. And my work as a therapist, coach, counselor now is very involved with doing somatic work. And I just took a weekend long training on internal family systems or parts work that is somatically informed, because you do a lot of work with your body in that work. Yeah,
that's amazing.
when I read the other book that I read was Dr. Robert Lifton's book on Chinese brainwashing, thought control, totalitarianism, and he identified 8 criteria for high control groups. And that's the one that when I read, I went, I've been in a cult for 26 years. I mean, it was like boom. And so this is why I tell people when I use the word cult, it's based on academic research.
Hmm.
I don't call things a cult just because I don't like them or I disagree with them, or there's even the dictionary definitions say that it's a new group. And it's like just because something's new doesn't mean it's a cult, a destructive cult. And so one of the criteria that really hit me was dogma over experience,
Hmm.
meaning if a teaching from the group conflicts with your experience, then you ignore your experience. You submerge your experience. In other words, you cut off your body.
Yes.
And so that was one of the things that really hit me. I believe that cognitive dissonance is when I'm doing that. Okay. I get, here's the teachings and here's my experience. And if I want to stay in the group and I want to keep my social world going, because when groups practice shunning, that's what's always hanging over your head, then I got to submerge this. Once I don't value this as much as this, it shifts. And that's when I think people really start to make decisions for leaving these things. And for some people, it's very quick and impulsive. For some people, it takes a long time. I know people I've worked with, there are people in that group, they call them PIMOs, physically in, mentally out, meaning they still go to the meetings and they put up this facade of being faithful because they don't want to lose their families and their friends. Many times these
Right.
people are fourth and fifth generation, you know, they have to live kind of a double life. I've heard of people, I've been told about people that they celebrate Christmas in their attic with their kids and make their kids not tell, which very bad for those young people growing up. That kind of creates this dual um reality for
Yes.
children growing up like that, right? But people are so afraid of being ostracized that that's what they do.
Right. I think that's really interesting that you say that in that way because it's a very primal thing that that human beings need community. We we wouldn't it's linked to our survival.
Right,
Um, back when we were living in caves or whatever, if you didn't have your group, your community,
right,
you would literally probably die if you were by
right.
yourself.
Well,
And
and that is one of the punishments. There's a really great series of books called The Clan of the Cave Bear about a little Neanderthal girl that grows up with Cro-Magnon people, and at one point she gets ostracized and kicked out into the wilderness. And she's the hero, so she survives, but
oh my
not
goodness.
really. That's not, that wouldn't you wouldn't survive that, especially at 10 or 12 years old.
Probably not. And even if you did, it would
Yeah.
be extremely traumatizing.
Right, right. And so yeah,
Um,
we have this deep need for connection and community. And people have died, people who've gotten, disfellowshipped and they're just left, and groups like the Watchtowers, the witnesses, the Watchtowers, they don't have community outreach. They don't tell people about how to get, food stamps or Medicaid or whatever help that
mhm.
they might need. That's not part, they're all focused on the going door to door stuff, the preaching of the good news versus really, taking care of their people.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's this link between these types of groups and poverty. And
Yes. Yes.
I'm not sure exactly why that is, but I noticed that it's a pattern. I know in my own experience, we were extremely poor. My father was the only one working. I had seven siblings, and he was, not very educated, so he didn't make very much
Hmm.
money, but he was still giving 10% of that to the church.
Yeah.
So things were, I don't think I was ever starving, but things were pretty tight. And
Yeah.
I would have like two uh clothing objects that I could wear.
Mm-hmm.
One would be
Hmm.
washing and the other was clean.
Hmm.
So that sort of poverty is something that I think is why do you think
Absolutely.
that is? Do you think that is because it's just a sacrifice of needs to meet the needs of the group? Do you think
Well,
it's go ahead.
when you got a group that's like focused on the future, the paradise, the witnesses believe that they don't believe in heaven. Everybody knows the witnesses believe something about 140, only 144,000 people going to heaven. Well, that's going to be, I like doing this because it feels like preaching, but
No,
that's going to be
I
the,
actually want to hear that because I've heard something about that number, but I actually don't know
yeah.
that. And I think a lot
So
of
they
people
believe
probably
that's
don't.
that's the kingdom government, okay, with Jesus as king and Jehovah over all of it.
Okay.
And so, wait, my brain starts going a little blank now.
Wait, I have a
Um,
question.
yeah,
So if 144,000 only get into heaven,
right.
and I mean the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Watchtower, it's a huge organization. I'm
Yeah,
assuming there've been way more than that for members. So what I'm hearing is that
right.
even if you spend your whole life and sacrifice everything and whatever, there's a pretty high chance that you're actually not going to do the thing and
No,
get to heaven.
because Armageddon's coming and God is going to wipe out all the bad stuff, which means everything and everybody but us. And we're going to live on paradise earth and for the 1,000 years that's mentioned in Revelation. um, then we're going to be cleaning up the earth. People are going to be resurrected and given the chance to worship the true God. And if they don't, then they go to the lake of fire, which is just symbolic. The witnesses do not believe in a burning hellfire. If you're dead, you're dead. They also don't believe you have a soul, which has been a difficult thing for me because I am a psychedelic therapist, and the spiritual world around that a lot is people who are, I believe the normal things, the witnesses teach you are a soul. When you're dead, you're dead. And if you're resurrected, it's from God's memory. And so you do not have a soul that survives. Okay. And they have all this rigmarole they go through to explain all that from supposedly the original languages. But yeah,
So if only 144,000 can go to heaven, that
everybody else lives on earth forever. You
oh,
do
I
not
see.
die because this is the way God intended in the first place, but Adam and Eve sinned. And so this is what was intended. And they will quote things that, scientists don't really know why we age and die.
Right.
That's something they're always looking for. So they'll pounce on something like that and say, see, that's proof that we're supposed to live forever. And so, yeah.
Huh.
So that's what you believe, right? Everything's in the future. And so why build up riches now? And of course, they're always preaching against riches. This was one of my last turning points. I went to my last regional conference. So there's probably 3 or 4 thousand people there. And they had just I decided to go to college before they said it was okay. I was in such a state. My mind was, well, I've got to have something to do to put my one foot in front of the other until Armageddon gets here. I've been doing, and there's nothing wrong with these jobs, okay? But I've been doing house cleaning and physical labor. I worked at a place called the Price Club out here, which is the precursor to Costco.
Uh-huh.
Watch the, but I wasn't supposed to like my job. My poor
Right.
mother, who didn't teach me the religion, but I certainly grew up with her fear of Armageddon was going to come and she was going to be on the wrong side. Her motto, although she worked all her life, was everybody hates their job. And so when I started liking my job, well, I'm not supposed to like my job, so I'd quit. They hired me back like 4 times, but after that, they wouldn't hire me back again. So people don't, out here in California, it was in the beach area, especially if you got yourself in a position where you could buy a home, that was blasphemy. You were not supposed to be buying a home. Now in the Midwest, that was different because it was much more affordable and that was the reasonable thing to do. But
Mm,
so there's a large segment that there's like a middle class in groups like that where people have normal jobs, and mostly nowadays not so much. Both the husband and wife will work, but in my time, wives weren't supposed to work except
hmm
maybe doing excuse me, some house cleaning here and there to get some pocket money for themselves, right?
hmm
It's very much a patriarchy, by the way, very much a
Yes.
patriarchy.
I think a lot of
And
these groups are.
oh, they are. They definitely are. And, this is why sex abuse is rampant and
Hmm
domestic violence. There's just all kinds of, and these poor men that are elders, they're put in this position of being therapists, really, to people with really heavy duty issues. And they don't have any training or education. They don't know what they're doing. And
hmm
many of them are very arrogant and they think they know what they're doing. And they do a lot of harm in
Yes.
their so-called counseling.
Gosh, one thing that comes to mind for me, this is sort of along the lines of somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, but I had like an appendicitis and when I was around 12 and um in this group they my parents weren't supposed to bring anyone to the hospital unless they'd gotten approval from the elders first.
Yeah.
So they had our group leader come over and try to pray me better.
Uh-huh.
I nearly died,
Hmm.
needless to say.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, he thought that he might just come over and, heal me
Yeah.
magically by laying his
Yeah.
hands on me.
Yeah. Yeah. They're so full of themselves. It's kind of mind blowing. Like I said, this guy that I talked to on the phone the other night, it was all very cordial, interestingly. And at the end though, he had to preach at me. He couldn't not do it, right?
Right.
Probably counting his time on me, meaning the witnesses. Now they changed this recently, I think, because not so many people are actually going door to door. It used to be expected that you went door to door at least 10 hours a week and you would turn in this little card and
hmm
little check boxes for the activities, how many Bible studies you conducted, and all this various stuff. And you know
Well,
Now they don't have that, but oh yeah, my mind's
it's
going blank
become
again.
like I mean culturally it's become almost a joke. So
Right.
I'm sure if people are
Yeah.
even going
Oh,
door to door,
yeah.
that I mean
Yeah.
they're not getting people answering the door, and if they are, they're not getting people to
Well,
talk to.
mostly what they do now in places like Hawaii and San Diego is they have these little carts with all the literature. Well, some literature, they don't really have that much, and they have tables. And a lot of times they sit there, they don't even have a Bible.
Uh-huh.
And they have their big signs, jw.org, and people will come up and ask them questions. They just point to the sign. And it's like, I went door to door carrying a heavy book bag in rain, snow, 100-degree heat and humidity, you name it. And now they're just sitting around with these little carts and they
Huh.
don't have to turn in their time so much anymore either. And
That's
so,
very interesting. I wonder if
yeah,
that speaks
yeah,
to kind of a cultural trend of you know, like as we sort of progress as humans and societies evolve, we we tend to like work less or work smarter. So this could be sort of a manifestation of that cultural phenomena of people just not really working that hard, finding smarter ways to work, and hopefully, you know, overall as a society, we are evolving. I hope.
right. I think another reason for them doing it that way now too is they've got to keep people's minds buying into this whole prophetic stuff even when I mean so
Uh-huh.
they prophesied basically that when then they believed that the last days started in 1914 and that Jesus was put in power then because that was the start of World War I and blah blah blah
Oh my
and
gosh.
they relied on this scripture, this generation will not pass away. Well, guess what? The generation in the 40s, there's a very famous talk that the leader gave all over the country and was millions now living will never die. And they have changed. They have gone back and rewritten history and they've changed their online literature to say it said they said, oh no, it said millions now living may never die. No, it said will never die. And so they had to do this whole overlapping generation, and they did this convoluted math basically to kind of stretch out the last days. But I believe they think they're in this time, some prophecy about two witnesses, not not speaking, but being witnessing for God just by being there, kind of thing.
Hmm.
In the very last day, and they even use this phrase that we're in the last days of the last days.
The last of the last of the last is
We're in the
the next
last,
one.
and it's like that. And it's just so convoluted. And I feel, you know, uh, on the one hand, I have a great deal of compassion for people because I get
Yes.
it. I believe that way. I live my life that way. Whenever I would work outside in the world somewhere, you have this chip on your shoulder and you're always trying to witness to people and look for opportunities to witness to people. And you feel persecuted, when people put you down or whatever. And that whole thing is just, it's no way to live,
Yeah, it's
and
really
plus
not. I'm
yeah.
curious if there I would love to see a study being done where of course this would be so difficult to do. I don't even know if it would be possible, but I'm interested in like brain frequencies and what frequencies these people who get stuck in these groups for so long, if their brains show specific patterns,
Hmm.
because it seems to me to be a very, for lack of better scientific terms, like a very low vibrational state
Right, right,
that they're in. And I know there must be some scientific like way of looking at that and being like, okay, well, these people are, in this way, and maybe
right.
that sort of thing. But that's just not really, as far as I know, we don't have that data.
Well, here is a semblance of that. There's a really great little 10-minute video called The Power of Yet, by a woman by the name of Carol Dweck, Dweck. She's an educator and she's a researcher. And they researched how instead of giving kids failing grades when they're not doing well, they just wrote in not yet. And they showed in inner cities and on Native American reservations compared to Microsoft kids in Seattle area, whenever they instituted this way of thinking and speaking, the teachers and whole school systems, the kids just rose and rose and rose, did better and better and better. Okay. So in that research, they took pictures of kids' brains, and they showed that the kids who like when they were asked if they didn't do well on a test, and they were asked what they're going to do next time, those kids that said, well, I'm going to cheat, or I'm going to find somebody else that did worse than me so I can feel better about myself, those kids had what they called a fixed mindset, and the brain was much darker than the other kids who bought into the not yet concept. Their brains lit up, and
Wow, I
that's called a
love
growth
that.
mindset. Yes, yeah. So you can imagine. And I mean, and there's also other research that shows conservative versus other brains have big differences, meaning the amygdala is larger, and thus they have these more extreme emotional responses to things.
Hmm.
Well, guess what? There's also research to show that that's what happens when you're a kid and you're in a family. Even verbal abuse can cause that kind of brain development. And so I have some theories about that, but that's a different subject. But
Uh-huh.
the brain is definitely. I even know from my own experience, and I know that I went from being in a fixed mindset to a very much growth mindset the last 35 years, and or almost, yeah, almost 35 years that I've been out, I think.
Yeah,
Almost
for
30.
me personally,
So,
that fixed versus growth mindset is huge because I was very isolated from
right,
birth until 13 years old. So,
right,
I had, this normal connections that you make as a kid, like talking to teachers, talking to classmates, talking to, that kind of thing didn't happen. So
right.
I have to really consciously work on that. One of the things that I do is I listen to new music all the time.
Uh-huh.
I read different books and,
Yep,
I reach out, I try to build community, all these, building those connections in where
right,
they were intentionally, stifled or cut off
right, right.
is a way that you heal.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the bigger problems I run into personally and people I've worked with, the building new community. A lot of people, and not people that end up being, working with me, but they do what we call snapping, and they jump kind of right from the witnesses right into another, usually evangelical Christianity. And to me, that's just changing the focus from Jehovah to Jesus, basically. It's the same stuff. And
Yes, my family did
when
that.
they,
They snapped from
yeah,
Homestead Heritage to a Pentecostal church.
yeah, yeah. And there's no growth there. There's no unpacking. This is why in working with people, I tell them, because I get people who've been out of whatever they were in for 20 years, and it's bothering them again, or certain things have never really healed. I tell them we need to unpack your experience so you can see what you're coming from and why you still think in some ways the way that you do. I actually go over with a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people, I go over those 8 criteria that
Hmm.
Robert Lifton identified and help people see in practical terms how you experience that and why you're still having problems. But building
Hmm.
community is one of the harder things for people who really get away from organized religion, you know.
Yes, the one thing I would recommend over everything, just as somebody who's been in one of those and is still healing, find a support group, whether it's in person or online, just
Yeah,
specifically for this type of thing,
right, right.
so that you have, yeah.
I recommend Recovering from Religion is a really great organization. They even have peer counseling. Um, that's a really good one. And be careful because there are a lot of online people that are just stuck in their sadness and their anger, and they're not really finding tools to move on. And again, no judgment, and I have compassion for that. But when I ask people, if you want to, or we talk about using online, especially support or any kind of support groups, I I anything can be a cult, and so I don't buy into anything hook, line, and sinker anymore. But I have a lot of people that I have referred to 12-step groups like AA
Hmm.
and Al-Anon and those kinds of things. And I tell people to look for the other people that are talking about their experience and how they're applying these tools to their life and how they're progressing. And then I tell people other things to watch out for because anything can be run like a cult, a destructive cult. The person that I mentioned earlier that I was married to for 12 years, used to say the first word in culture is cult.
Yes, and a
And so
narcissistic relationship can be a cult of two, right?
that's right. That's absolutely right. So yeah, so I now just kind of distinguish between normal community cults or cultures versus destructive cults that take away
Hmm.
people's autonomy, that abuse women and children, that demand all your money. So back to the whole poverty thing, when you're living your life, basically your good life, your real life out in the future, then all you care about is kind of getting by now. Now, again, there's kind of different, they claim to have no classes, of course, classism. But of course there is.
Of
There are people
course.
who have money. One of the things that when I was leaving that last meeting I went to, they were preaching against college, even though they'd kind of opened the door a little bit about a year before. They're preaching against college. They're preaching against materialism. Don't watch I never saw an R-rated movie until I was 40 years old. I think I went and saw Alien Resurrection
Oh,
all
excellent.
by
Okay, that's one of my
myself.
favorite mo like I love the Alien series. Like I don't like horror movies usually,
Yeah, same here, right?
but if it's a good sci-fi and it
Yeah,
happens to be
yeah,
art, yeah, no, I love the whole Alien
yeah.
series. Like the okay, that's just wow. Okay.
So and I'm sitting there practically in tears. The stuff that had been, balm to my ears in the past was now just like, ugh, like stabbing me. And so I got up and I went out into the parking lot to my old beater car. I looked around, there's all these new cars, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, and I had lived with a lot of families, so I knew what was going to happen is the family's going to stop at Blockbuster on the way home, and the kids are going to get Disney movies, and Dad's going to get rated R movies and sit and drink alcohol by himself watching his R movies, and Dad's an elder. In other words, one of the same kinds of people that's up there preaching against R-rated movies, and there's just so much hypocrisy. And now my whole thing now is there are good people and bad people, or acting out people, I like to say, in all kinds of groups. I found some
Hmm.
really, really good ones, and I really miss those people, but not enough to give up my freedom again.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting that it tends to be, cognitive dissonance caused by actually using logic that is what makes people break free of those fixed mindsets and actually have the
Yes.
courage to leave these kind of groups. Because um, when you look at things on like a very basic level, logic is truth, which is, that which is orderly in the universe.
Mhm.
And so that's basically what you could call good if you're, breaking it down into those simple terms.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a spiritual way to look at it, good versus
Hmm.
evil. And
Hmm.
and things are not always that cut and dried.
No, not at
But
all.
just the logic is what tends to bring people back. And that is
Hmm.
like a sort of something that's logical can almost be considered like a subjective truth.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
then, like very simple
Hmm.
things. Like this is
Right.
what's sort of helped me to form a spirituality because after I got out of the group, I became atheist and then I was agnostic. And then through studying science and like quantum mechanics, I
Hmm.
sort of came back around to, okay, there's probably a higher power
Hmm.
and sort of just logically worked my way through that. And I came back to spirituality
Hmm.
through logic. So I think it's
Hmm.
really interesting how that works. And
Hmm.
for me, spirituality is pretty simple. It just means being of service to others instead of strictly service to oneself. And I
Mhm.
think that's what tends to happen once you have a healthy um, sense of yourself. You naturally become of service to others,
Oh, yeah.
which is what you've done. You've healed yourself, and now you heal other people.
Hmm. Well, they heal
Um,
themselves. I offer tools and
well,
support.
you
They heal
facilitate.
themselves.
You're
Right.
absolutely correct. Nobody
Yeah.
can do anything to anyone else.
And I make a thing about that because now I'm in the psychedelic world. I'm doing training with people who are guides, especially to help them understand cult dynamics, because that's a big problem in that world. Especially unfortunately, not only, but especially males taking advantage, right, in various
Hmm.
ways. And so I hear people, "Oh, I'm a healer." I'm like, No, you're not. My thing is, and people are all about the lineage that they came from and their training. I'm like, I don't care. I don't put anybody on a pedestal anymore. I
Hmm.
am my own hero. And I've learned that by being in this, medical mental health field,
Hmm.
gotten to know a lot of doctors that I had on a pedestal, and they're just people. They got their own problems. They're just people.
Yes, and I think that's one sign of, a healthy mindset is
Mhm.
realizing everybody, not putting anyone on a pedestal because
Right.
it's easy to do if you aren't, st have don't have like a strong foundational
Right.
sense of who you are as a person.
Mhm.
Um, but once you do, everybody's a person. And thank you for clarifying that because yes, nobody heals anyone else. We all are healing ourselves. We're looking for the tools to help us. And
Yeah.
so
And
you offer some
affirmation.
really, yes,
Yeah.
you offer
Yeah. That
some really
validation.
specialized, yes, validation, exactly.
Hmm.
And you offer a really specialized service where you actually work with people using psychedelics. So how does that intersect with spirituality, or does it for you?
That's interesting. And I can talk about my own experience because it's something I think about a lot, and I can't find a lot of people to talk to about this. Um, because yeah, in that world, people have these spiritual experiences, depending upon what the medicine is that they're using. They, talk about connected with God or the universe or feeling one with everything. And I have not had those kinds of spiritual experiences. I've had spiritual experiences, but they're not of that nature. And I actually think that my experiences reflect my belief system. I don't believe in some entity outside myself. I do believe in energies. And I don't know what I believe about after death, and I'm okay with not knowing what I believe about that, which is something else I mentioned to this person over the weekend, which they just don't know how to respond to because that's just not a concept because they know everything, right? They know what's going to
Right.
happen. I'm okay with not knowing, and that was a big spiritual growth for me when I kind of realized that that's where I was at with it. But yeah, I've had some extremely interesting experiences, but they're not like what I hear other people speak about.
Hmm.
And I believe very strongly that's a reflection of my belief system of not believing I'm going to meet. My joke is when I do anything spiritual, go to any kind of spiritual community, if I'm trying something out, my thing is I want to believe, just like Mulder in the X-Files.
Yeah.
I want, especially the metaphysical stuff. That's the stuff I was attracted to before I got into this. But for 23, 26 years, I believed and was inculcated in me. That's all demonism, right? I don't
Hmm.
believe in bad spirits anymore. Even Native American friends, I have like almost like a double major in Native American studies. And
Oh,
when I
wow.
was in Iowa, I got to know a lot of people. All my teachers were Native people of regional tribes. And this one woman was kind of preaching to me about certain area in the United States where all these it's a spiritual vortex, and this is where all this is going to happen. It just kind of started preaching into the world prophecy to me, and I said, "I'm sorry, I cannot go there, even if it's in the Native American world," which is another thing that I supposedly have heritage, and that I'm very much in the mindset of a Native American person in many ways in life. And
So you were just kind of like, okay, been there, done that.
you
Not
know,
helpful.
it's not, and I get the same thing now is that people just can't understand. I want to buy into astrology and other things, spiritual healing techniques, various things. And I try and I try and I just can't go there. And I realize it's not healthy to try to make myself get into something that it's just not right for me. And I have my ways of looking at my own spirituality and not just being stuck.
Yeah, I think that's very, very a very grounded perspective that you have because also, I mean, the word spirituality means so many different things to so many different people. And like you
Mhm.
said, there's, astrology and there's, spirits, there's channeling. It's like all these things that come to mind when
Right,
somebody says spirituality.
right.
So the way that I'm thinking of it is I just break it down into something that's spiritual means that to me means that it's focused on helping others
Hmm.
and not solely self-aggrandizing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, which is what you see in these control groups where it's the opposite of spirituality
Hmm.
when you
Hmm.
look at it from my definition, because it's all about the very small elite at the top
Hmm.
gaining more and more wealth and power
Right.
while
Right.
taking from others. So while some of these groups might be consider themselves as spiritual groups, they're actually not because they're
Right.
not.
Oh,
And this
no,
is just
no.
my definition.
Yeah, no, but I'm with you on that. The one I was in anyway was very death oriented while they are preaching life. It's very death oriented. And they're sex obsessed. They're constantly telling people what kind of sex I, they told you what kind of sex you could have in your marriage.
Yeah, and that's something that I mean, we can have probably a whole series just on sexuality and sex
Hmm.
abuse within the
Yeah,
context of these groups.
absolutely. Yeah.
But whenever something is suppressed and something's so powerful, because this is
Hmm.
like, it's the core of who we are, this is how we're created.
Right.
Um, and to have, shame around your very being and this very natural function
Right.
is probably the most controlling um, modality or
Right.
the most effective controlling modality that these groups have.
Right.
And it's often not even in your face. Like that's not one of the main points that they talk about.
No,
But I feel like
not
that's
until
one
you
of the
get into
main,
it.
exactly. And this is one of the things that people have the most shame around.
Right.
So it becomes like one of the most controlling factors.
Right. And
Um,
controllable
yeah, and
because
my
people have
friend,
shame.
my friend that's ex-Mormon was talking to me about it. Did you know that when they're married, they have to wear like a special undergarment?
Hmm. Yeah, I've worked with Mormons.
I had no idea. I was just like,
Hmm.
okay, it's like knee-length shorts and like a whole
Hmm.
t-shirt that they
Yep.
have to wear underneath every outfit.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
That's just crazy. Um,
And when you're in something like that, it seems like the most reasonable, normal thing in the world, those
right.
requirements, right?
Right. And
In
we're
my,
not here to judge what people are doing, but just bringing a different perspective, right?
right. Well, in my world, number one, so they had the Watchtower and Awake magazines, okay? And every year you bought these volumes that included all the Watchtowers for 1 year and all the Wakes for 1 year. So I had a whole wall full of those, okay? And everything you needed to know about how to live your life to the nth degree was in there. Okay. So if you had some dilemma or some problem, the common phrase was, what does the society say? What does the society say? Watchtower Society. And I mean, again, to the kind of sex you can have with your husband, and it would change every couple of years, to whether you could speak to your disfellowshipped, loved one, including 14, 15, 16-year-old children, because they have this whole thing about not eating with sinners. I've worked with people who at 15, 16, they got in trouble, they're experimenting with drugs or alcohol like kids do. And and there's trauma in families because dad's an alcoholic, but he's an elder, so it's hush hush. So the kid gets in trouble, kid gets disfellowship, they have to eat in their room away from the family. So many of them will just leave home. I've worked with many people who've left home at 15, 16 years old and somehow made it,
Mm,
at least the ones that I know. Right?
right. And that's what's called compounded trauma, right?
Right.
One
Right.
trauma leading to the next, to the next.
Absolutely. Well, and you grow up with these very negative views of the world, but now you're out in the world and you got to make a living, you got to, get through and find a place to live and so on and so forth. And you still have all these kind of distorted ideas about life. And, as any traumagenic family produces adults with depression, anxiety, and PTSD, you don't have a positive outlook on life.
Hmm.
You survive and you're in survival mode versus, survivor mode. Right. And
Absolutely.
so, I met, it's funny because it was finally left at 96. So around 95 and 96, had a computer because I was in school.
Hmm.
The internet had no pictures on it. The internet was gray screen, white text. That's all the internet was. And I actually found these ex-witness people online and this big group from Europe. And I ended up talking to this one guy a lot. He was fifth generation, a bunch of his family had left it. And he was so angry and vitriolic. He spent his whole time, it seemed to me, trying to get people out of the religion as he spent the same kind of time trying to get people into it previously. And I decided I am not going to let my self get in anger and stuck in anger and regret. It was just this little decision that I made to myself when I saw that. And I had anger and some regret, but I don't live in anger and regret. And once in a while I'll have something, you know, like there's a family in San Diego. The father became a witness in the early 70s. And he was a lawyer and he became a very well-known lawyer in town here. He and his wife had three or four kids, two or three of them are boys, and they all went to college and they all went to law school. And I wasn't supposed to go to school when I was 18 to have a life, right? And
Right.
and when it was, gosh, 20 years after I was out of it or so, like 5 or 6 years ago when probably 10 or 12 years ago when I came back to San Diego last time, I saw their law office and is like, what in the heck? And then I learned, oh, all their kids got to go to college
Right.
and law school, no less, and make a living. And and the premise would have been to serve the organization. That's another term you hear a lot. The organization is which all stands in for God. Okay, when they say the
Yeah.
organization, they mean that God is blessing this organization and directing it, and so all this. So probably the premise was they're going to serve. Because their father went all around the world defending the witnesses on the blood transfusion issue when children are involved and sex abuse. And so the premise would have been that that's what they're going to do, but they don't. They have a private practice where their practice is with the public. And
Hmm.
so that kind of stuff, you know, on the other hand,
Yeah. That's do you think it's a manifestation of the patriarchy as well? Because
oh yeah.
I mean, in the group I was in, some of the children of the elders that were men were encouraged to, find a way in the world to study, at college and do something, useful to
Hmm.
the group.
Hmm.
But all the women were expected to get married right away, at 18 or
Right, right, 18, right. Yeah,
so
I was an old maid when I got married at 23.
yeah. So like men could go and serve the Lord in the worldly fashion because they were
Right.
strong enough or whatever, or that
Whatever.
was God's will, whatever they used. But women couldn't do that, right?
Right, right. Or not
Oh
to
my
teach
gosh.
not to teach in the congregation. That whole thing goes really funny, extremely, because they like before they go door to door, they have a little meeting and they talk about a Bible scripture and blah 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 and what they're going to preach that day. And if there's no man present, a woman can lead the meeting, but she has to have a head covering. You see people take Kleenex and put on their head.
Our group had a
It's like
similar thing. Yes, women were not supposed to be speaking in
how,
church.
you know, yeah, how dogmatic and how there's a word for that, just nitpicky, ridiculous. No, no, letter of the law kind of stuff, not the spirit of it, basically.
Exactly.
And so that's why it's not really spirituality. To me, spirituality is what you said as far as service and being connected within myself, connected to others, connected to the larger world. Their whole thing was no part of the world, no part of the world. That's why they don't vote. And you can't have worldly friends and blah, blah, blah. Now my whole thing is I'm part of it. This is where I live, you know, and like the answer to that person's question about where we'd be in a million years is like, I'm worried about my life now.
Yes, and that's what that
That whole
does when you're
thing
worried
is
about the
distract you, right? Distract
right.
you from living paycheck to paycheck and not having savings for your kids and so on and so forth. My joke is I wish I would have gotten smart 10 years earlier. My bank account would look a lot different, but oh well. I'm happy to be where I am,
That's
in life.
yeah, that's good. It's everyone's journey is different and we could talk about hours on or 4 hours about each one of these topics that we've kind of brushed
Yeah,
on, and I hope that you will come back for some more sessions
love
with
to.
me. Great.
Love to.
So if someone's listening today that they're stuck in a controlling group, whether it's a relationship with a partner or a could be a multi-level marketing group, it could be a
Mhm.
religious group, it could be a pseudo-spiritual group. Um, if you feel like you're in some kind of situation where you just don't feel right about it, what's something that you would say to them in the moment?
Trust yourself, even though that might feel very foreign and very strange, and you'll second guess yourself and question yourself. But trust yourself, trust your feelings, your emotions, your what you feel in your body. If your stomach starts flip-flopping when you walk into the church, pay attention to that. It's probably been doing it the whole time you've been there, but you haven't allowed yourself to feel it, literally.
That is so
And
wise. I love that. Listen to your body. Your body knows.
mhm,
And if you
yep.
have some issues where something is not for your or it's not supporting your health and your best life, it's going to manifest in your body. So listen to
Right.
that.
Oh, absolutely. And we can talk about that for a couple hours sometime too. Um,
Right.
yeah, and so, the other thing is be careful who you reach out to online, but there are a lot of good resources online. There are a lot of activists. There's some that I respect and they're humans. So there are some that I like what they present about the religion, but there are some things that have been revealed about them personally that's like, that's a little iffy, but
Hmm.
the information is still good, and I'm not going to church and sitting by that person for instance. But look for information that rings true with you. Recovering from Religion is a wonderful organization. They have tons of videos. I've done a couple presentations for them, one on shunning and one on people becoming suicidal out of all this. They've got a ton of stuff. And they offer, like I said, free peer counseling. Um, Another one is in International Cultic Studies Association, ICSA. They just redid their website. They're a wonderful educational organization. Um, so just allow yourself and know that you're going to go through a period of time of chaos, at least in your mind, if not in
Hmm.
your life. But one of the best things I learned in my master's program was one of my first classes was we had to read books about chaos theory. I'd never heard of that. out of chaos comes change and growth. It doesn't ever happen out of things being all the same.
Right.
So allow yourself, this is what I tell people, even just in trauma work, even apart from, this kind of stuff, is that you're going to have moments that are uncomfortable because you're challenging your brain. When you start changing your beliefs, even your beliefs about, saying the word should a lot, which is something I try to help people give up. Letting go of the word should was revelationary for me. It was just an amazing thing because the Watchtower literature is full of should, and
Mm,
that
love
changed my
it.
life. Another one, but you know, you're opening up your brain and you're making new pathways, and it's kind of like old reference, Star Trek Pon farr for Vulcans, Spock. They go through a Pon farr, and it's like this accelerated growth thing that happens, and it's kind of funny and campy in the old episodes, but it's kind of what people go through, and if they don't expect that, often they'll go right back to the group because it's too uncomfortable and scary.
Hmm.
Or one of the things that happens right now in the larger world, which I keep asking people to try not to do, is when people do come out of a cultic situation, family and friends will say, well, he told you so. Well, guess what happens? People go right back to where it feels safer.
Hmm.
So welcome people back and support them and go have your venting and your gripes about them somewhere else.
That's excellent advice. Thank you for that. Where can listeners find your work or connect with you for support if they want to work with you?
Sure. So they can email me it's Cathy at CathySHarris.com. Cathy's with a C. Gotta put the S in there. There's lots of Cathy Harrises out there. Just look up my name, Cathy S. Harris. I'm all over the internet. That's my website, Cathy S. Harris. Um, and they can contact me through there, and I can either help them or give them some resources that might be helpful for them. I can't unfortunately help everybody. I need to make a living, and sometimes in this field, especially, people don't have money because they've been in these groups that have controlled or taken their money.
Hmm.
And so I really rely on recovering from religion quite a bit because they're such a great resource, and they do offer that free peer counseling for people. But just,
Wonderful.
yeah.
And you are licensed in 3 states, right? If somebody wanted
Mhm.
to
Yep.
work with you through their insurance.
Yeah, I take a little bit of insurance. Uh-huh. Yep, I'm licensed in California, Colorado, and Florida right now.
Okay, and then also you had mentioned something about a military program you're
Yeah,
working with.
yes, I work a lot with veterans and even active duty right now through something called the Headstrong Project, and it is theheadstrongproject.org. Great organization. Yep.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for connecting with me and kind of just, doing this first episode. I hope to do more with you, and I know we have a lot more to talk about.
That'd be great. Love it.
Awesome. Have a beautiful week.
All right, you as well. All right, take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.